If you're only using Claude to ask questions, you're using about 10% of what it can actually do. I use it every day to build tools for my clients, to automate admin work, and to draft my marketing content. But I started exactly where you are. And frankly, I was wondering if this was something that could help me do real work. So here are 10 things I've learned. Now, none of them require any advanced tech skills. And actually, two of them are simply changing settings most people don't even know exist. So let's dive in and get to number one: ask user questions. Ask user questions is actually one of my favorite tools inside Claude. So early AI needed complex prompts, but models have gotten a lot better. So in this case, you're going to want to put in the task and then the goal, and then have it ask you the questions it needs to give you the best answer and to successfully complete the task. So here's what I wrote. Again, not a long prompt. Help me design a 90-day engagement plan for a new client. Ask user questions until you're 95% sure you can complete this task successfully. So let's hit the button and see what it asks. So, because we're inside my Claude environment, it is going to read my context files. So, it already knows about my business, about my brand voice, about who my clients are, which is really helpful when you're trying to get an answer that's really specific to your business. So, here's the first question: what kind of a client relationship is the 90-day plan for? And I'm going to say it's for a retainer or an ongoing consulting engagement. So, I'm going to hit that one. And is this template you want to reuse for every new client or a one off plan for a specific person? And I'm going to say reusable template. So it thought for a little bit more, and now it's asking me some more questions. Now, notice down here, there's this button for quick answer. So if I wanted to stop thinking and stop asking me questions, it'll just spit something out. But if you want something customized, let it do its work. And by the way, notice here that I'm not using the most expensive model. I'm using Opus 4.6 High. So not even Opus 4.8 and certainly not Fable. That's really too expensive for this kind of work. So now it's confirming to me that it's at 95% confidence it can be successful and is telling me that that's going to build. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop it right now because I want to talk about something. When you're using the higher priced models, it's really important to tell it to give you a plan before it builds anything, or it's just going to dive straight into building like you just saw it do right there. So I actually forgot to put that on my prompt, but you always want to include show me a plan before you build anything, or you're going to spend a lot of money that you didn't actually want to spend unless you catch it like I did just there. So that's enough for you to understand how ask user questions works, and you can tell why I like that so much. So let's go on to number two, which is set up your global settings. Now, this is one of those ones that I mentioned at the beginning of the video that nobody even looks at and can be super helpful. Because sometimes there are things you want Claude to do every single time, like if you have personal preferences for tone and style, like how about no emojis? Okay. So let me just show you where global settings live. So you come here and you got to go way down here and hit click on your name and then go up and click on settings. And this will be under general. And so what I would recommend you put in here is a little bit about who you are and what you do. I put in how I want it to talk to me. And then I also put in here that I want like the default model to be Opus 4.6. And that just keeps me from spending a bunch of money on a more expensive model when I just get in and start working. And I'm not necessarily looking at what model I'm using. So the watch out here is don't go crazy for all the stuff that you put in the default settings. The next thing we're going to talk about is projects, and the instructions for those actually override these. And if they conflict, it can get really confusing. Now, the reason I didn't put my context files in the general settings is because every time it has to read a context file, that actually is burning more tokens. And so a great way to save tokens is to only have it load the context files you need for a specific task. So number three is get organized with projects. You can use projects in Claude two ways. One is for one-time projects that have a beginning and an end, like let's say website redesign, okay? The second one is that you can use projects for an ongoing task, like newsletters or proposal writing. Now, if you're going to use projects for client work, and I recommend that you do, you want one project per client because we don't want the context files to leak between projects, okay? So the best reason to use projects is that you can have memory that goes from conversation to conversation you have in that project. And then you can also have context so you can upload files that are specific to the project. So, for instance, if you were doing website redesign, you might have had a bunch of different inspiration ideas, screenshots you've taken, kind of a look and feel. You don't need that for any other project, but you can upload it just for that one task. And so Claude can always reference it when you're working on that project. So I was just going to show you a few of my projects that I use all the time. I've got a chief of staff project where I load all of my context, everything about my business, my brand voice, my ideal client profile, my AI thinking, right? So the chief of staff really has a 360 view of everything I'm working on. I have another one, social media with brand voice, that I primarily use to write captions for social media. I've got one where I just work on YouTube videos. Oh, here's a great example of a one time project. I was working on rewriting my welcome sequence. And so here I put in ideas that I had, I put in my old welcome sequence, and I also put in some research I did about best practices for new welcome sequences. And so I was able to use all of that for every time we had a conversation about something I was trying to create in there. So, the fourth thing that I would recommend, and this is relevant to your use of projects, is to go ahead and invest in creating some key context files. At a minimum, you should create a brand voice file and what I would call a point of view file, because that really teaches Claude how you think and what differentiates you. So, I did a whole video where I talk about why you need those two files, and I'll go ahead and drop that in the description. Now, when we do Build Your AI Marketing Assistant, I actually have my clients create two more files. And one is an ideal client profile. So Claude always knows who my audience is. And then the second one is that I create a business profile that talks about my different services and products and price points. So it actually has a feel for what my objectives are. So, yes, context files about you and your business do take time to create, and you have to fine tune them. But once you have them in a place where you want them and where they're working, they're really game changers in terms of getting output that you can use and that is of high quality a whole lot faster. So if you're working on your computer using the desktop version of Claude, your context files actually live on your computer. But if you're using projects in your browser, which works just as well, then what you do is you upload the context files down here. Now, the fifth tip I have for you is to go ahead and write project instructions. So I'm inside a project. This is the rewrite welcome sequence project we were just talking about. And you see this box right here, instructions? This is one where you're going to want to go ahead and fill that out because it's really giving Claude a job description for what that project is trying to accomplish. I did a whole video just on project instructions, and I'll drop a link to that in the description as well. I think this project has a particularly good set of instructions. What you want to do is come down here and you can see there's boxes called instructions. And you just go in here. And what I recommend is using the actor framework. So, A for act as, right? What persona do you want Claude to take on when it's doing this work for you? The audience, who your intended recipient is of whatever it is you're working on, the context, sort of the high level context, the tasks. So in this project, the tasks are generate video concepts, do the packaging, that's the thumbnail and the title and the hook, and then outline each episode. And then for the output, I actually am specific about that when I give the prompt. So I didn't put anything about that. And then requirements or rules or how I want it to act every time. It gives it some more structure. So again, if you want more about the actor framework, I will drop a link to that video in the description. Let's move on to number 6. Number 6 is connect your tools. So there's a lot of people out there who put out these lists of all these tools you need to learn. But I say start by connecting Claude to the tools you already use. So let's look at how to set that up. So we go here and we're still in Claude in the browser, right? You want to go down here and click on your name and then go to settings. And you see this long list on the left. And if you go down to the bottom here, you see skills, connectors, and plugins. What you want to do is click on connectors. And this is going to show you all of the options for you to connect things to. So again, I bet a lot of you use Canva. You can connect it to Canva. Gmail, if you use Outlook, there's an Outlook connector. Your calendar, a Google Drive, or again, if you use the Microsoft Suite, you can hook it up there. Notion, if you use it, that's where I keep my to-do list. But if you use Asana or Trello, those are all available as well. So you can see there's a lot of opportunities. And if you want to see what the other things are that are available, you can just come here to browse connectors and it's going to show you all of the options. So one thing I want to make sure you don't miss is hooking up whatever you use to take meeting notes. So I use Notion, but a lot of people use Granola. A lot of people use Fireflies. Some people use the built-in Zoom note taker. Whichever one it is, make sure that you can point Claude to your transcripts because they are an incredibly rich source of insights about your business and also a great pool of ideas for marketing content and to get deeper understanding of your ideal client. Now, number 7 is simply toggle web search on. Now, this is the other setting that I talked about that most people don't even know exists. So let me show you how to turn it on and turn it off. So as you're starting to chat with Claude, if you're talking about anything that requires up-to-date information, like any kind of research, anything where you need the most current information, you're going to want to come down here to the plus sign and just make sure that web search is checked on. And you obviously turn it off the same way. So here's why this is important. The LLMs, the data that Claude is built on, each version of Opus or Fable or whatever, that is based on a set of data that has a cutoff date. And that cutoff date is often 6 months ago. So if you're asking Claude what's trending right now or go get me the latest research on, Claude is not going to do that by default unless you turn web search on. And I don't think this will surprise you, but when it answers from its training data, it doesn't always tell you, hey, I'm answering from my training data and this might be out of date. It's going to answer super confidently. So again, anything current, pricing, competitors, what somebody shipped last month. For that, you're going to want web search on. Now, if it's something there you're just working from your own files, go ahead and turn web search off because I will say when it does go out and look at the web, it is burning more tokens. So not as important if you're using a cheaper model, but super important if you're using something like Fable. So number 8 is to actually play with the models and the different effort levels and learn what kind of output they get you because you don't always need the most sophisticated or the most expensive one to get to an outcome that is going to work perfectly for you. So when you're looking at the chat window, you can see all the models here and we can just drop down on this. Hello. So Fable 5, that's the frontier model and the most expensive right now. Opus 4.8, Sonnet is a little faster, pretty good for everyday tasks. And Haiku, if you're seriously just asking, like, can you recommend a restaurant for lunch? Okay. And then notice that you can set the effort level for each of these too. So it's defaulting to medium, but you can always set it on high or max. So generally, when I'm working, I do want it to give me a deep answer, but I usually drop it back to Opus 4.6 or Opus 4.8. I'm really careful to only use Fable for things that are really complex and nasty problems. So let's do a quick real-time example of this so you can actually see the difference between two models. And I'll use two models that are pretty far apart so you can get a feel for it. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with what kind of an answer we would get from a Haiku 4.5. And I just made up a question, we can ask it. So I'm a business coach, 20 years of experience, getting leads on LinkedIn. Close rate is under 10%. Discovery calls go well, but my prospects ghost. What's actually going on and what should I change? And we're going to hit go. So I deleted the wait time to keep this thing moving, but it took about 30 seconds. And it's saying discovery calls work because there's a conversation. The real issues are probably these: pricing, generic proposals, weak follow up. And it's giving you a bulleted list to fix it. Fix it in the call, fix the proposal, fix the follow up. So I'm going to grab a new chat. I'm going to switch to Opus 4.8. It's high. Paste in the prompt, and let's see what we get. Okay, so this answer took a little longer to come back, but let's look through how it looked at the problem and reason through the action steps we might take. So it says, hey, the proposal isn't your problem. It's where the problem becomes visible. So it says that you have misdiagnosed the problem and that your calls actually are not going as well as you think they are. So now it actually talks about what to change. So if you'll remember, Haiku just gave us a list of things that we could potentially look at. This actually goes into what we should change and a detailed fix for the problem that it is diagnosed. And then it ends with a question, want me to rework your actually discovery call structure so that the close lives inside it. So you'll actually get a lot of variation regardless of what you're working on. Okay. If you're working on drafting content, if you're working on a proposal, if you're working on a strategy problem like the one I just showed you. So you really should get a feel for what the different models can do and what their relative strengths are. Because, first of all, you're going to get a whole lot more out of your $20 a month plan if you use the right model for the right task. So, again, this is a tip where I would really encourage you to just set aside some time and play around and run tests exactly like the one I just did. Run those for yourself. Number 9 is to start capturing your ideas with your voice. And I love this tip because it took me such a long time to start doing it. So I'm super comfortable typing, but voice is so much faster and you can do it on the go. And it makes it impossible for you to self edit. So you kind of pull raw ideas out that Claude can then help you develop. You can just go on your phone, and at least on iPhones, there's a built in voice capture tool. Grab that, throw the transcript back in Claude and have it do whatever you want to with it. So, one of my favorite things about voice mode is that even if you don't like to use AI to write, it's good for organizing a bunch of thoughts. And again, you can just talk so much faster than you could type. Try this one out. You're going to think, oh, I don't really need that or it's crazy. You're going to be really surprised at how easy that is. So, my number 10 tip for you today is to build with artifacts. So everything we've been talking about, it gets your thinking in, it gets Claude working. Artifacts are the result of what you produce with AI. It's a real deliverable. So you're not hunting around in the chat to find what you talked about and what you decided on and what you drafted. And artifacts are a whole lot more than docs, right? You can ask it for a dashboard. You can ask it for a lead tracker. You can ask it to format your proposal. You could ask it to build you a mock up of a landing page. Okay. Claude builds it right next to your chat as something that you can edit and you can reuse, and you could even hand it off to somebody else. The table of contents that we've been using throughout this whole video, where the title of each section slides in, that actually is something that I created with Claude Artifacts. Artifacts are actually the literal outcome of what happens when you leave the chat with Claude, right? The value lives outside the conversation because you've actually created something tangible that you can then go use in your business somewhere else. So I hope you found something in this video that'll make you hit like and subscribe. And if you're ready to try projects, this is the video I recommend you watch next.